Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to give you a very warm welcome to Westminster, although this particular room is not as warm as we would like. We have asked that the windows be closed, but they can't do it until tonight because it requires a ladder and all sorts of ancient equipment. But they are bringing an extra heater, and I do apologise for that historic. It's a nice historic building, but there is that problem that it's a bit cold. Well, anyway, good afternoon and welcome. I'm delighted to welcome you to our second sitting here at Westminster, and as before, I will be co-chairing with Nathalie Loiseau from the European Parliament and chair of your delegation. We've had some very topical and good discussions during our third meeting in Brussels, and I hope that we'll be able to continue in that vein today. We have a lot to do, and I'd just like to hand over to Nathalie for a few words of welcome. But before I do that, it is good news that today the Specialised Committee on Participation in Union Programmes is ratifying Britain's membership of the Horizon programme as from the 1st of January. And we had, of course, pushed for that.
Well, thank you very much, dear Oliver. Whoa. And thank you for welcoming the European Parliament delegation here for the fourth meeting of the PPA. I'm sure we'll have warm debates and warm discussions, and we will not even notice that the windows are open. I'm also very happy that you're back in Horizon and that we can work again together on very important research programs. We are happy to be back here in Westminster. We look forward to our exchanges for today and for tomorrow. We have quite an ambitious program ahead of us, and I'm certain that our debate will be fruitful like it is always. So back to you, Oliver.
Well, thank you, Nathalie. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, had hoped to be with us to open our meeting as he did last time. But unfortunately, Sir Lindsay is not well, and so he's unable to come today. However, I am delighted that we are joined instead by Dame Rosie Winterton, the First Deputy Chairman of Ways and Means and the Deputy Speaker. Dame Rosie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Sir Oliver, and good afternoon. I'm very pleased to open this important session, important fourth plenary session of the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly on behalf of Mr. Speaker, who, as Sir Oliver said, is unfortunately unable to be here this afternoon. This is the second session of the Parliamentary Assembly that we have hosted here at Westminster, and together with those held in Brussels, it's clear that the Assembly is making great strides forward, and I can sense from the atmosphere in the room that we are in for a good session. So I warmly welcome the Assembly's co-chair, Nathalie Loiseau, Vice Chairs Sean Kelly and Svetlina Penkova, and to all members joining from the European Parliament. You are most welcome. And a welcome to representatives of the Welsh Senedd, the Scottish Parliament, and the Northern Ireland Assembly, and to representatives of the Committee of the Regions and the European Economic and Social Committee. All of you join this Assembly as observers, and together with invited guests and of course those ministers and officials from both sides who will address the Assembly and start off each debate. It's excellent to see all the invited guests here as well. I know that you have a very full agenda for your session this afternoon and tomorrow morning, including debates on the state of play within the Partnership Council, the mobility of people, artificial intelligence, and climate change. And that later this afternoon, you will also get together in break-off groups to consider citizens' rights, fisheries, and data protection, all highly important and topical issues. And I'm sure there will be extremely lively debates, as well as being interesting and productive. And I get the feeling that that's what we're going to see. And later on this evening, there is a reception in Speaker's House held in the staterooms, and I hope that you will all be able to come there to enjoy that event. With that, I once again wish you well in your discussions, say how pleased we all are that you're here in Westminster. Once again, pass on the apologies of Mr. Speaker, but he does send his very best wishes to you all for another very successful plenary session. Thank you.
Well, Dame Rosie, thank you so much for your kind words and best wishes. We're grateful to you for giving up your time to open the meeting. And in his absence, I'd also like to extend our thanks to the Speaker for his kind hospitality this evening, and perhaps you could convey our good wishes to him. Thank you very much. Now, before we start, there are one or two bits of housekeeping, but we'll allow Dame Rosie to depart. Thank you so much.
Good luck. It sounds like it's going to be great.
Yes, just two pieces of housekeeping. I'd like to remind the Assembly that the meeting is public and the proceedings are being live streamed on the UK Parliament YouTube channel. I'd also like to remind people that the UK Parliament has a behaviour code which applies to everyone, members, staff and visitors alike, so courtesy is the rule at all times. Although I must say we've been pretty courteous so far, but I have to mention that. And anyway, I'll now hand over to Natalie.
Thank you. And one more housekeeping detail. You all have headphones. And because I will speak in French, for those of you who don't speak French, you can try your headphones. Chers collègues,
Dear colleagues, today and tomorrow we will be discussing important issues on the agenda of our Parliamentary Assembly. These are essential issues when it comes to cooperation between the European Union and the United Kingdom. This afternoon, we'll be starting with adopting the minutes of our third meeting held in Brussels from the 3rd to the 4th of July. Then there will be an exchange of views on the state of play of the work of the Partnership Council. The next item will deal with the mobility of people. After an exchange of views, we'll be adopting a recommendation to the Partnership Council on mobility programs involving young people, student exchanges, school trips, and artist tours. And then at 4:30, we'll be having a coffee break. Then we will be having informal discussions. Tomorrow morning, we'll be starting with the presentation by Lord McFall of Alcluth, the Lord Speaker. We'll be continuing with the report from the heads of the breakout groups, and we'll be submitting a document to you containing the main issues raised during the breakout groups. We plan to share them with the Partnership Council. Then we will be talking about artificial intelligence and climate change, including the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. We will then have an exchange of views on future work of the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. The draft agenda has been handed out to the two delegations, and if there are no comments, the agenda will be considered adopted. I'll give the floor back to Sir Oliver for the next item on the agenda. Thank you.
Well, Natalie, thank you very much. And the next item is the agreement of the minutes. The meeting was held on the 3rd and 4th of July. They have been circulated. Unless there are any questions, can we consider the minutes agreed? Thank you very much. The minutes have been agreed, and I'll hand over to Natalie.
Merci.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, the state of play within the Partnership Council, with our two guest speakers, Leo Doherty, the Under-Secretary of State for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and Pedro Serrano, EU Ambassador to the United Kingdom. I'll give the floor to our guest speakers, and after their presentations, we'll have an exchange of views with them. I'll give the floor first to Mr. Leo Doherty.
Well, Madame Loiseau, Sir Oliver, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely delighted to be here again today to speak at our Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. Following our agreement of the Windsor Framework, the UK is enjoying a more productive relationship with the EU, rooted in shared values and strengthened by advancing our shared interests with our European friends and allies. This positive new phase means we're able to work together to resolve differences and make the most of areas where we agree as proud Europeans. The success and evolution of the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly has also shown how our cooperation makes us stronger. And I'm grateful for the recommendations from previous plenary sessions on energy security and Ukraine. And this positive spirit and momentum is something I hope we can preserve through our respective elections over the coming year or so. We face some huge challenges, including Putin's continued aggression, energy insecurity and climate change, illegal migration as well, and we are therefore committed to working with the EU to overcome them. As reaffirmed in the UK government's integrated review refresh, the security and prosperity of the Euro-Atlantic and reinvigorated relations with Europe remain core priorities. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the world's largest zero tariffs and zero quotas deal, has provided a stable basis for our relationship for more than 2 years. It offers a balance between access to our biggest market and autonomy to set our own rules, and we are now focused on maximising the opportunities it presents. The Windsor Framework Agreement provided a boost for our partnership, and we are determined to strengthen it further. Since the last meeting of this Assembly, we've agreed our association to the Horizon Europe and Copernicus programmes. This agreement, which is today being formally adopted by the UK and EU, provides our scientists with a stable basis for cooperation, further strengthening and deepening links between the scientific communities in the UK and in the EU. So this is a win-win for EU and UK science. Our TCA committees, of course, are working with increasing efficiency, with more than 55 meetings since 2021, and 18 of those occurring over the last couple of months. We have had recent constructive exchanges on global supply chains and regulation of the digital economy. Our work has led to tangible progress in a number of areas, including setting up cooperation mechanisms in key sectors, including automotives and pharmaceuticals, delivering market access for UK lawyers, and supporting trade in organic products. These committees have also facilitated frank conversations, including on the EU's approach to cyber security and the requirement for UK small businesses to appoint costly fiscal representatives in the EU. But in a mature relationship like ours, it is right that we can have frank conversations and find solutions. And the UK therefore stands ready to strengthen cooperation in a number of other areas. We all know that travel and cultural exchanges have always helped young Europeans to grow as people and to flourish, which is why we are open to discussing improving youth mobility, as we do with other international partners, including Iceland. We stand ready to strengthen cooperation on the new challenges of our rapidly changing world, such as the safety of artificial intelligence. President von der Leyen and EU member states made an important contribution to the AI Safety Summit that our Prime Minister hosted in November, where world leaders and developers recognized the need to collaborate on testing the next generation of AI models against a range of national security, safety, and societal risks. Earlier in the year, the Prime Minister and President von der Leyen agreed to strengthen work on tackling irregular migration and cross-border crime by developing a new UK Frontex working arrangement. Discussions have progressed well, and work to finalise the agreement is ongoing. However, there is more we can do together in this area, and we welcome last week's People Smuggling Conference organised by the Commission. We need to be clear that it is not the traffickers who decide who comes to Europe, and that we will not tolerate the risk to life their business models entail. A mutually beneficial UK-EU migration agreement would send a strong message that Europe will not tolerate dangerous and illegal movement into and across the EU. Turning to energy, the UK has resumed participation in North Sea's energy cooperation, and we discussed how collaboration can advance the green transition at a ministerial meeting with partners in the region this November. The region's huge potential in offshore renewables will strengthen European energy resilience, and it's an important step, hugely important step towards net zero. There is a lot more to do to maximise the benefits of broader cooperation on energy, and I know both the UK and EU are committed to taking forward this work at pace. Since Putin sought to create an energy crisis after invading Ukraine, we have worked to protect Europe's energy security. We have facilitated the flow of liquefied natural gas into European storage, and in 2022 we were a net exporter of electricity to the EU. Of course, turning now to international peace and security, we are of course united in condemnation of Hamas's brutal terrorism against Israel and our desire to alleviate the suffering of civilians in Gaza. Our teams are working together to provide humanitarian support. We are also united by our continued diplomatic, economic and military support for Ukraine and by our sanctions against Putin, his allies and his war machine. Together with our allies, we've helped impose the largest package of sanctions on Russia that any G20 country has ever faced. The UK's military, humanitarian and economic support for Ukraine pledged since the full-scale invasion now amounts to over £9.3 billion, which complements the EU's own €67.7 billion worth of support to Ukraine. By his aggression, Putin has inadvertently helped to unite Europe and our democratic allies. So, Sir Oliver, friends, colleagues, in conclusion, can I say that the UK government is determined to intensify work with the EU and make progress on our shared priorities for the good of both partners. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement provides a platform for progress, and this Assembly will continue to have a very important role to play in our future relationship. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je passe.
Thank you very much. I'll give the floor now to Ambassador Serrano. Thank you very much.
Honourable co-chairs, Minister for Europe, dear Leo, honourable members, I am delighted to speak on behalf of the European Union at the fourth meeting of the EU-UK Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. Allow me to begin by conveying Executive Vice President Maros Šefčovič's regrets for not being here with you today. As many of you might know, he is representing the European Union at COP28 in Dubai, but he does send his best wishes to you for a fruitful discussion. Indeed, as recalled by the Deputy Speaker, this body, this Partnership Assembly, is an essential forum for parliamentarians from the European Union and the United Kingdom to exchange views on our partnership. And this partnership is needed more than ever. The brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the events unfolding in the Middle East since the horrendous terrorist attacks by Hamas on 7 October are reminders of the multiple challenges facing the international community in which, as Minister Doherty was saying a moment ago, the European Union and the United Kingdom have to face together as close and like-minded allies. Honourable members, let me address EU-UK relations more specifically. The withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement are together the cornerstone of our relationship with the United Kingdom. The full and correct implementation and application of the withdrawal agreement in all its parts remains a crucial component of a functioning partnership with the United Kingdom. In this sense, allow me to say a few words about the Windsor Framework, which is an integral part of the withdrawal agreement. The implementation of the framework has already delivered a series of important benefits to people and businesses in Northern Ireland in the areas of VAT and excise or tariff rate quotas for certain categories of steel. An impressive amount of work has gone into implementing the initial phases of the new sanitary and phytosanitary and customs arrangements, which started applying on the 1st of October. It is crucial to ensure the full, timely and faithful implementation of these arrangements. Indeed, the Windsor Framework offers no transition periods, and the full implementation of all safeguards is necessary for the good functioning of these arrangements. A lot of work remains to be done in the future too, as the foreseen arrangements under the framework continue to be rolled out until 2025, with new expected milestones in the areas of customs, SPS and medicines, if the corresponding safeguards are in place. It is indeed the full implementation of the Windsor Framework that will continue to bring benefits in Northern Ireland, as the framework brings definitive solutions jointly found for Northern Ireland. In this context, allow me also to be clear that the framework cannot and will not be renegotiated, and as we have seen from the statements of the Joint Committee co-chairs, there is a firm commitment from both sides for the full and faithful implementation of all its elements. Still on the withdrawal agreement, let me say a few words on citizens' rights, which is a topic of utmost importance to all of us. Cooperation has been smooth in this area, but some challenges still persist. With 5.7 million EU citizens living in the United Kingdom and 1.1 million UK nationals living in EU member states, both the European Union and the United Kingdom have a clear interest in making sure that the withdrawal agreement works for everyone. As Executive Vice President Šefčovič has reminded us in the past, when the citizens' rights of part of the withdrawal agreement, without the citizens' right part of the withdrawal agreement not implemented correctly, there are no winners and only losers. It therefore goes without saying, EU citizens must be able to enjoy fully their rights under the withdrawal agreement, as UK citizens as well in the European Union. This is particularly valid in the aftermath of the UK High Court's ruling on the residence status for EU citizens in the UK who are protected by the withdrawal agreement. More generally, several other matters in this area continue to deserve our close attention, and we continue to address them with UK counterparts in the relevant fora. We will remain vigilant as to the correct application of the withdrawal agreement so that it delivers for everyone. And this, of course, also means that we will continue to address all relevant issues that the UK raises regarding its nationals in the European Union, if not solved bilaterally. Honourable members, turning to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, it is clear that it is not and can never be a replacement for EU membership. With the UK having left both the single market and the customs union, we have two totally separate customs territories, markets, regulations, and policies. Trade is therefore no longer as frictionless and dynamic as before. This holds for goods, but also for service providers moving between our markets. And this in turn results in additional costs for both UK and EU businesses. This may be regretted, but needs to be accepted. Having said that, we have a mutual interest in the TCA working well for our mutual benefit. Thanks to the Windsor framework, which has allowed us to turn the page, we are in a much better situation than a year ago. I would in particular like to acknowledge the welcome progress made since the last Parliamentary Partnership Assembly in July this year in advancing the full implementation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. One of the highlights, and many of you have referred to this already, is the agreement on the UK's association to Horizon Europe, the EU's research and innovation program, as well as to Copernicus, a world-leading Earth observation program. And I don't have to inform you because everybody has already mentioned this, that today, indeed our chairs and Minister Doherty, that the protocol is being signed this morning, or has been signed this morning. We have also signed, not this morning, but we also signed a few months ago or a few weeks ago, an MOU on financial services regulatory cooperation. The first dialogue pursuant to this MOU took place in mid-October. But there is much more work going on. This work is maybe less visible, but crucially important. This year alone, the joint bodies under the TCA have taken over a dozen formal, legally binding decisions that address very different policies, ranging from fisheries to social security coordination and value-added tax. These joint bodies have met approximately 30 times this year to discuss and improve the functioning of the TCA. And we will hopefully soon be able to launch the dialogues foreseen in the TCA on cyber and counterterrorism. Discussion on a wide range of issues will continue, but will not necessarily be always easy. It is important that we continue to address difficult topics such as the application of the retained EU Law Act. We have to remain vigilant, in particular when it comes to environment and employment. It is important to be aware that divergence can only further deepen the barriers to trade between the European Union and the UK. Looking ahead, I would like to make the following points. The TCA is the basis for our cooperation, but much is still to be done on securing its full and ambitious implementation in areas such as fishery and electricity trading arrangements. We also remain attentive to level playing field issues. One important aspect here is climate policy and achieving the climate targets agreed in the TCA, a topic which is on the agenda of your meeting. And we also follow the domestic UK debate on the European Convention on Human Rights, which is one of the foundations and prerequisites of our law enforcement cooperation under the TCA. As regards fisheries, the rules for ensuring reciprocal access to waters will change in 2026. It is important that we start to think about this already. It is useful that you will collectively discuss this issue in one of the breakout groups. I'm glad to see that the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly is also paying attention to the issue of mobility by adopting a recommendation on this topic. We know that the UK and the EU views on this might not yet fully converge, but we think it is important to build more bridges, especially for our young people. Finally, I would highlight that one possible area of closer cooperation is, of course, security and defense. Honourable members, the European Union continues to work on a positive and stable relationship with the United Kingdom based on our mutual interests and the full and faithful implementation of the Withdrawal Agreement and the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. At a time where Western unity remains so important in the face of serious security challenges, the European Union and the United Kingdom need to continue working together as the closest of allies. Thank you, and I look forward to the debate. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Minister. I don't know if you'd like to add something.
Natalie, I think both of our speakers have shown the improving efforts that are leading to better cooperation, and that's something we on the Assembly really glad to see. We called for a solution on Northern Ireland. We welcomed the Windsor framework, and it's good to hear that the implementation is going forward and good progress is being made. We wanted to see us Britain back in Horizon, and we are, so that's very good. We had a recommendation on energy, which was soon followed by us being able to associate to the North Sea energy countries, and I'm pleased about that. But I do think in our recommendation we had some strong, we wanted to see more efficient electricity trading arrangements, and I think some more progress still needs to be made on that, and I'd certainly think that that would strengthen the case for renewables investment in the North Sea in all our countries which border it. And then finally, we are worried about rules of origin for electric vehicles, because right across the European automotive industry, there is a concern that this should be delayed, and I hope that that might be possible. But anyway, perhaps we'll hear good news about that for Christmas. But just a few comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Oliver. On my side, first I want to thank both our speakers for their introductory remarks, and also take stock of the fact that there is no goodwill on both sides and good texts, which makes our relationship smoother and easier. And I think it's a common objective that we all share. Now we know that there are still some loopholes, some topics that were not addressed by neither the withdrawal agreement nor the TCA, and on which we might improve things in the future. And situations, and especially individual situations from people impacted by the end of freedom of movement, which have to be addressed. And I think it's going to be the work of our Parliamentary Assembly to come with suggestions and recommendations. Now I'd like to give the floor to you colleagues to react to the two speakers' interventions. I would ask you to limit yourself to 2 minutes in order for everyone who registered to take the floor to be able to do so, and of course for our speakers to bring answers to your questions or remarks. And I will start by Lord Peter Ricketts.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chairman, and a very, very warm welcome from me also to our European parliamentary colleagues on a wet afternoon in London. I very much welcome the positive tone of the two interventions, and I liked a lot the way the Minister put the issues about the need to intensify our cooperation, and I think he described the PPA as a platform for progress, which I would certainly welcome as well. And in addition to the formal agreements that have already been listed by speakers, to hear that we are now working well together on the national security issues like AI, like cyber, like sanctions against Russia, that is very important as well. There are multiple risks and challenges in our world, and it seems to me that makes it all the more important for us to be broadening our cooperation. But given that this is a session on the state of play in the Partnership Council, and that things are moving so fast, I wanted to ask whether the two speakers are content with the operation of this very complex machinery of governance that we have for the withdrawal agreement and the TCA. I note that the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee has met 3 times this year, largely on the issues of the Windsor Framework, which is quite right. But the Partnership Council, the senior mechanism under the withdrawal and the TCA, has only met once this year and once last year. And actually many of the specialised committees as well are not meeting very often. In the Lords European Affairs Committee, we suggested that the Partnership Council ought to be meeting at least twice a year, and there should be a very fluent and regular exchange at lower levels. Are we using the mechanisms that we have in the TCA in particular enough? Are we seeing more ad hoc cooperation growing up outside it? Ought we to be working more intensively through the structures in the period before the TCA review? Thank you.
Thank you. Now we go to Sean Kelly.
It's great to be here again, and thanks to Lord Oliver and his colleagues, Lord Peter and Dame Angela, for their hospitality. I think, as the Right Honourable Doherty said, there's a positive spirit of cooperation, and I think after any divorce there's bound to be a period of friction, but with the establishment of PPA, I think that friction eroded, and now we're in a very positive frame of mind. And we won't be worried about the consequences of elections in terms of their impact on policy around the world. I think we can be rest assured, no matter who is elected in Europe or in the United Kingdom, that the positive spirit which we have created in the PPA will continue. And this was very evident in the vote on the report which myself and colleague Schneider authored for the Parliament 2 weeks ago in Strasbourg, when in the implementation report on TCA it was almost passed unanimously. So that positivity, I think, is very encouraging. Also, the Windsor Framework has really put a line under the sand in some respects where we're moving forward, and I think people are very happy with it. Overall, it has been a very positive development. It took a lot of time and effort, and great credit to both Ursula von der Leyen and the Prime Minister of the UK for it. If we could get the Northern Ireland Assembly up and running, and this is a question I would ask, is it likely to happen soon? And if so, then that, I think, would really underpin all the positives that we are talking about and bring probably finality in some respects to any of the difficulties we've had, and we'd have a means of addressing them as we move forward. Also, I thought that Right Honourable Doherty's comments in relation to irregular migration were very relevant. He's quite right. People smugglers mustn't decide who's coming to Europe. Neither can Putin decide who's coming to Europe, and neither can Lukashenko. So I'm just wondering, how do the colleagues see the opportunity of getting a migration pact that works for people? Because many people are very concerned, particularly in relation to irregular migration, and it's being utilised by those who aren't that concerned but pretend to be, to cause mayhem, as we see even, unfortunately, in my own country, in Dublin, in recent times. And finally, in relation to Ukraine, you mentioned the sanctions. We're now talking about a 12th package, but I think there is an opportunity for us, maybe collectively, to look at how effective previous sanctions have been, and particularly to look at evasion and working together to ensure that those who are successfully, unfortunately, evading the sanctions, we might be able to work together to ensure that doesn't happen. So they're the points I would raise for now. I welcome, of course, as Lord Oliver said, that UK is back in Horizon. Erasmus is also something we would like, and my colleague from Ireland, Colin Markey, will be speaking on that later. That's something we can look at in due course. But I think it's great to be here. It's great to have the positive feeling that we're working together, that we're mature adults, and we're giving good example of how politicians should work positively for our peoples. Good morning.
Thank you. Next on my list is Sir Robert Goodwill.
Thank you very much indeed. It's good news that we finally got agreement on Horizon, but actually Horizon should be one of the more easy things for us to agree, and the reason we didn't agree Horizon is that it was linked to progress on the Northern Ireland Protocol, which ultimately resulted in the Windsor Agreement. I hope that in future we can actually see things together rather than trying to link things that shouldn't be linked, and I'm particularly worried, as the Minister mentioned, the cooperation on energy provisions. Those provisions run out at the end of June 2026, at the same time as fisheries agreements run out. Now, the fisheries agreements will be quite difficult. We know from previous experience as part of the EU how those annual negotiations with the Faroe Islands, Norway and everyone else can be quite difficult and protracted, and there'll be an additional dimension, particularly as our fishermen are quite frustrated. They've had to wait 5.5 years for the full benefit. So my plea would be that let's make progress on energy cooperation, but let's not hold that up because of the more difficult situation in fishing. I know Lord Ricketts will be leading the breakout group, but if we're going to actually make progress and really progress in an atmosphere of goodwill, then I think we should not try and sort of hold a gun to people's heads, which was a little bit the case with, I'm afraid, with Horizon, when we should have agreed that months or years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Pedro Silva Pereira.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for your hospitality. Indeed, the Windsor framework was a game changer, and I'm glad to confirm that a delegation of the International Trade Committee of the European Parliament was in Dublin and in Belfast, and the the reaction we got on the ground is that the implementation is going well. The business sector is satisfied, and even the access to customs data, which for a long time was an issue, is now an issue solved. But of course now, in order to make additional progress, power sharing in Northern Ireland will be very important. Sean Kelly raised the issue already, but we are aware that the Northern Ireland Committee here in the House of Commons has very recently adopted a report on ways to avoiding blockage in the functioning of the institution in Northern Ireland. We would appreciate information on that if you can provide it. Also on citizens' rights, and this will be the second question, we are aware of a judicial decision here about the issue of transition between pre-settled status to settled status that we very much welcome. But the fact that there is no need to a second request in order to obtain settled status is probably not enough. We have to ensure smooth transition from pre-settled status to settled status. So how do you see that happening here in the UK? Because we are talking about many of EU citizens living here that only got pre-settled status. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Sir Jeffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to our colleagues from the European Union. Reference has been made to the Windsor Framework, and at the time of its publication, we welcomed the progress that has been made. I endorse the comments of Minister Doherty that we're working to achieve further improvements and change that hopefully will restore the cross-community consensus that is essential for power sharing to work in Northern Ireland. I wish I could answer Mr. Kelly's question directly, but I'm hopeful that we can see the level of progress required. Madam Chair, I think one of the words that will be used often over today and tomorrow is the word risk as we survey the international scene. And we were told at the time that the Northern Ireland Protocol was about managing the risk to the Good Friday Agreement. And it is important that when people talk about making changes to that agreement in the absence of cross-community consensus, they tread very warily indeed, because restoring consensus means bringing people along in agreement, and that is what is now required. And whilst I note the comments of His Excellency, the Ambassador, about the Windsor Framework, I do hope that in the interests of managing risk, that is the risk to the single market, which I think can be managed in a way that also prevents further risk to the Good Friday Agreement. And it is striking the right balance that is absolutely critical in moving things forward. So I hope, in addition to the efforts being made by the UK government to resolve the outstanding issues, that the European Union will also demonstrate its goodwill towards resolving those issues. And let's not get into the use of inflexible language on anyone's part.
Thank you. Next on my list is Chris McManus.
Thank you, Chair, and thank Sir Oliver for the heater. You'll notice by the scarves you might need to put another 50p in the meter. No, thank you, Chair, and I think it's good that we're here. And I know that there's wider concerns about the level playing field and issues around divergence. And some of those concerns are probably emanating from this side of the water, regarding when we think about things like the level playing field and how it affects things like the strikes bill, rollback on environmental law, and when we hear comments about the abandoning of the ECHR and how that impacts obviously on human rights, which undermines Article 2 of the protocol, which in itself is there to ensure that the Good Friday Agreement is not breached in any way. And that's critical and important, that we need to see the upholding and implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, because that for all of us in Brussels was one of the key things during the whole Brexit negotiation, was protecting the Good Friday Agreement. So I want to ask is comment on maybe the compatibility of the Legacy Act with the ECHR. And second thing I'd like to ask is regarding obviously the political focus in the north of Ireland is obviously on the immediate restoration of the executive and the assembly, and we hope that is relatively soon. But on a wider issue that will take place maybe further down when hopefully the political dust settles, is the one of the issue of democratic deficit. We have a situation where there are 2 million people in the north of Ireland who are now impacted on decisions made in Brussels, made by us. And it's where do we find the place to ensure there's a formal structure to give voice to those in the north of Ireland, to be part of that process when we are making decisions in regards, and we in Sinn Féin have said it should be the likes of observer MEPs, but it may be committee-to-committee peer meetings, etc. So what I'm asking is, how do we begin to square that circle of giving voice to 2 million people in the north about decisions being made in Brussels that affect them? Thank you.
Next speaker on my list is Baroness Hayter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the tone of our opening speakers. We're not at the end of an era yet, but next year will be the end of the mandate for the European Parliament, and indeed the end of the mandate for this Parliament. Next year will be the centenary of the first ever Labour government, so we're rather hoping to repeat that next year. Between now and March, in a sense, of our next meeting, I think we need to start preparing for what we will hand over to our successors, be that the new European Parliament or indeed, hopefully, for me, a different government here, sorry. And that's quite an important time, it seems to me, because there will then be quite a gap before the two get together again. And it seems to me, you know, what we've looked at so far, and you know, both the UK government and the ambassador have stressed the international milieu in which we're working and the challenges of that. And we've heard that from the Council, but I think we as parliamentarians need to ask our respective governments how they're rising to the demands that they've outlined. The EP has very helpfully done a whole resolution on this and has a mechanism for saying how it judges what's gone on. And I very much welcome that, particularly, of course, its reminder that the TCA is conditional on UK's continual respect for the ECHR, has been referred to by Chris McManus and by the ambassador. But I also want to bring out of that the welcome I have to the reference to the political declaration and the need to go beyond the constraints of the TCA as we look forward, and the recommendations in that for a structured framework for cooperation on foreign and security matters. We've no equivalent here of being able to take a resolution to our Parliament, though Lord Ricketts and his committee do sterling work on that, but we don't have quite the same mechanism. So I guess my questions are, how can we as parliamentarians look at what you're going to be looking at over the next 6 months? Are you going to be setting a mandate for your review of the TCA in due course? And how can we, and indeed the citizens of Europe, play a part in those discussions?
Thank you. The next speaker is Gert Bourgeois.
Thank you, Chair. Let me first say that it's good to see all the colleagues and the friends again. I think we made a lot of progress after the TCA. We made new agreements. Most important, of course, is the Windsor Agreement. Now also we have Horizon, Copernicus. I hope that in the coming days we have an agreement also on the rules of origin for our electric vehicles, which is very urgent. The end of the year is nearing. But I want to plead for a stronger cooperation in defense and cooperation. The world is very unstable. We have the Russian aggression. We have the threat of terrorism. I think it's time now to strengthen the ties also in these areas. Second, maybe you remembered I pled already for a cooperation, a triangle cooperation with the United States in the TTC for artificial intelligence. I think we should set the standards together worldwide. China is imposing, is building a Silk Road also for data, for artificial intelligence, and I think we should cooperate also in this field. And also in nuclear. You're not longer a member of the Euratom, but I think for the nuclear fusion, it would be very useful to cooperate, to find a way to cooperate again. And my last issue is the question, I don't know if it's part of the discussions in the Partnership Council, but how do you deal with the ERA? Should we not work together? Because there's a kind of threat, of course, for our green tech in the European Union, but also for the green tech industry in the United Kingdom, I think, with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Thank you. Next speaker on my list is Lord Kirkhope.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think that when we left the European Union, I think there have been different attitudes, both in Europe and also here in the UK, as to how close we wish to work together. I think there are differences of opinion still, and certainly in the UK. Some of us want to work as closely as possible within the limits that are available to us. But one area I do want to touch on is migration, because I think that is a big challenge to all of us looking ahead, maybe the 10, 20 years ahead, through climate change, through political instability and the like. And I'm encouraged to think, and having been one of those involved in preparing the Dublin Agreement, Sean, on the LIBE committee some years ago, I am somewhat encouraged that although there are difficulties both within Europe, between the member states, and also in this country too, over the whole issue of migration, I am optimistic that we should work as closely as possible together on this subject, because it is one where there is much emotion, much concern by your constituents. Now I'm in the Lords, not so many constituents of mine, but as I'm not elected, but nevertheless, we all feel very strongly on some of these issues. So my view is, let's see how we can work better together on that subject, and in doing so, perhaps help Europe itself to resolve those matters. It's a good example, ladies and gentlemen, one of many, but it's one which I personally feel quite strongly about, where we can work together closely within the terms of our separation. Thank you.
Next speaker is Alan Smith.
Thank you, Natalie. It's great to see so many former colleagues also from my side. As a Scottish European, I feel very comfortable in this setting. And I'd start by praising the Minister, perhaps unexpectedly to him at least. We supported the Windsor Framework from my party. We wanted to see progress. We wanted to see the relations as deep and close and functional between the UK and the EU as possible. That suits my party's proposition. I think that's in the overwhelming mutual self-interest of all of us. And I think there's a role for this forum to do more. And we welcome the progress that we have made, of course, but I think there's a lot of greater need for more confidence-building measures, and I think there's some real low-hanging fruit which we can offer from Scotland in energy and fisheries cooperation. And I would urge the UK government to redouble its efforts, and I'd also urge the Commission to redouble its efforts as well, and not be quite as formalistic as we have seen to date on some of these matters. Energy security is a huge issue for all of us, and Scotland and the UK are in a great position to provide that stable energy supply that we all want to see. This is something that we can obviously win very big for our citizens on. Intra-EU energy cooperation has always been controversial in parts, but I think the UK can really lead by example on this, by being that reliable, constructive partner that the EU wants to have. I also want to see Erasmus Plus progress. I think the logical thing for the UK to do, and I support the UK's discussions on youth mobility with the bilateral arrangements, but I think we can do better by just opting into Erasmus+. There's a framework already there, there's a precedent already there, we can raise our ambition. We would also like to see more progress on the phytosanitary and veterinary agreement. It's frankly embarrassing that we've not made more progress on this, And I would say to all parties that we need to do much better for the citizens we all serve. But this is about finding solutions, and I think there's plenty of things for us to be working on. So it's good to see you here.
Thank you. The next speaker on my list is Baroness Mobarik.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, can I say it's great to see colleagues from the European Parliament. I just want to talk about something slightly different. It's about electronic trade. And in the UK, we've seen the passing of the Electronic Trade Document Act. And I want to point out that both the EBRD and DG Trade are plugged in and aware of what the UK is doing. And there are some amazing statistics as to the benefits of paperless trade. Too many to list, but just to mention a few: 100% increase in trade flow, 100% removal of logistics paperwork, 30% reduction in operations cost, and 15% increase in profitability. So with Paris Europlace leading in France, it's expected that France will be aligned to the ETDA in 2024, and same with Germany. In fact, there is an interoperability pilot being conducted in the automotive sector between the UK and Germany for supply chain digitization. But the question is, how do we align the whole of the EU? Currently, there is no central mechanism in the EU Commission, and DG Trade will be aware of the challenge. But the EU are part of the WTO e-commerce agreement negotiations group, so there is a commitment to align laws and to establish paperless trade corridors. But how can we accelerate on alignment, because it is such a win-win situation for the UK and the EU? Is this something that we can help with at the PPA? How can we put it high up on our agenda? And I think it fits in with that very positive new phase that's been talked about.
Thank you. Next on my list is Lord Little. Sorry.
Thanks. It's lovely to see everybody here. I think I've got 3 points. First, welcome the tone and the warmth of what our opening speakers presented. But I think there's still a gap between goodwill and rapid action. And in our Lord's European Committee report on the future relationship, which Lord Ricketts referred to, we did set out an agenda there of things, of areas on energy, North Sea cooperation, on defence issues, on mobility issues, where there is all scope for rapid action, in my view, and should be no problem. And that was a cross-party report, including Norman Lamont signing, who was very strongly in favour of Brexit. Secondly, I'd like to endorse what Lord Kirkup said about work together on migration. I think there's a real danger for Britain in going down a very unilateralist road in its attempt to control its borders. And the consequences of that could be that we lose police cooperation and the things that are really valuable if we're going to have a joint European approach. And finally, I think we do have to step up cooperation on economic issues at the time of the revision of the TCA. And I worry, and this is not meant in a nasty spirit, but I worry that parts of the European Commission treat Britain as though we're equivalent of the Philippines as a third country, when in fact what we're demonstrating this afternoon is that we have so much in common that that attitude is completely irrelevant.
The last speaker on my list will be Valérie Vaz.
Thank you. Follow that, as they say. Can I just say that the windows may be open, but I hope you feel the doors are also open to future discussions. So it's good to see everyone here. I'm afraid I'm going to follow on the theme slightly, which is that the Partnership Council have the ability to make law, and they're making decisions, and yet that doesn't seem to be disseminated out to the rest of all of us, and certainly to our constituents. There seems to be a delay in the information that's coming out. I know it goes up on the FCDO website and the EU website, but it takes a while to do that. And so some of the things that I've picked up, for example, on Gibraltar, if we could have some sort of idea of where we are on the discussions. I know there's a new government in Spain, but it would be helpful to do that. Mutual recognition of organic food schemes. Now, that may sound niche, but that took effect in Jan 22, and it has to be reconfirmed by the end of the year, and yet nothing has been stated about that. So what can we do to speed up that position? Again, EU VAT, one-stop shop. It was discussed at a meeting in 2023, but the minutes, again, are not available. Mutual recognition of professional qualifications. The timetable is set by the Partnership Council, and yet, again, we've had nothing since July. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a lawyer. I hope, as Baroness Hayter says, that to be back again following the next election. But Horizon, we've all mentioned how important Horizon is, and I know our scientists were in absolute despair. We've just made the decision today. And yet they're going to start in January 24. So that's absolutely, I think, is unacceptable. The point is we do need, as we've discovered in the last election, and when the Brexit election, to leave or not leave the EU, is that when there's misinformation and disinformation, the gap is usually filled by the far right. And we've seen the far right rise across Europe. And I think we should be on watch that even our democracy is under threat unless we provide this information for our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you to our colleagues. Now I will get the floor back to our speakers, starting with Peter Doherty.
Well, thank you very much, Madame Loiseau. Yes, indeed. Yeah, I know what you meant. That's fine. Well, I'm very grateful for the questions, and I'll respond briefly, folks, because I've got to go back downstairs to answer an urgent question. But I am very grateful for the questions. I'll try and cover them off. Lord Ricketts asked an eminently knowledgeable question about the structure. Of course, the structures are important. We think they're working pretty well, but that doesn't mean that the ad hoc stuff isn't important. The Foreign Secretary was in Brussels last week for NATO foreign ministers. So that mix of formal and informal will always be, we hope, the useful combination of approach. That's what got the Windsor Framework over the line. We look forward to maintaining that similar approach into the future. Thank you to Sean Kelly for the question about Storm, which I think was answered to a degree by Sir Geoffrey. But of course, we know that's extremely important, and we're seeking to work towards that end. You made a good point, sir, about working together to counter sanctions evasion. That's something that comes up across European capitals all the time. Sir Robert Goodwill made a plea for goodwill. And we can get behind that. When it comes to particularly energy, we are seized entirely with the urgent importance of a collective approach to energy sovereignty, really, because therein lies a greater degree of collective security. Mr. Pereira made a good point about citizens' rights. Of course, it's in everyone's interest for this to be done in a smooth and compliant manner. And we do take that very seriously, and we deal with a huge amount of casework in that regard. I was grateful to Sir Geoffrey for his comments with regard to the hugely important issue of cross-community consent. He knows that we take that extremely seriously. It is a question of balance, and we look forward to cautious and determined work together to achieve a positive outcome for all. Very grateful to Baroness Hayter made some rather sort of provocative and gloomy predictions about the change of government. And of course, I'm not going to get involved in psephology from this platform, but God forbid there were a change of government. I think the legacy of our current position is that actually it's a very pragmatic, mature, positive relationship, and I don't think that would change, actually, to be frank. So I won't rise to that challenge, but I think we're in good shape, and we can be proud of what we've achieved over the last year in terms of the institutional relationship between His Majesty's government and the EU. Grateful for Mr. Bourgeois' suggestion, plea for cooperation. That really is what we want as well. Lord Kirkhope made a very good point about migration. I mean, it's absolutely right. I think migration poses an existential threat to the way European structures work. We have to work together on that. Collaboration is absolutely the answer, and this is what we're doing at the EU level, but also bilaterally. But collaboration holds the answer. Alan Smith was suspiciously effusive in his praise. I don't quite know what he's after, but I'll take it because it doesn't come very often. And he makes a very good point about energies and fisheries. These are absolutely critical. EU energy security cannot be achieved without the support of UK and of course Norway, but the North Europe supply and support of energy sovereignty in the EU is critical. We know that, but it's in everyone's benefit. It goes both ways, and fisheries is an important component of that. He mentioned I note his comment, his comment on Erasmus Plus. I won't comment on that, but I will note it, and I think I appreciate his approach. Of course, we all think opportunity and cross-border education, opportunity for young people. We all think that's important, of course. There were a couple of other very good technical points from Lady Mubarak, and Lord Little made a very good point about migration. We've got to solve this together. We know that. That's becoming all the more urgent in this country, and the solutions will be collaborative. And there was also a very good question about Gibraltar, following from my honourable friend. Following the new government, we hope to resume negotiations, and clearly we hope to achieve an outcome that attends to the sovereignty of Gibraltar, but also looks after the interests of the 13,500 Spaniards that come and work in Gibraltar every day. And that's something I take particular interest in, and we will keep doing that. But folks, the answer from our side is collaboration. This assembly embodies collaboration, so I'm grateful for your questions and your contributions today, and I wish you well for the rest of the afternoon and whatever this evening may hold. And Olaf, if you've got any technical questions, Olaf, I'll leave him here. This is our EU director. But if you excuse me, I've got to go downstairs and answer an urgent question about Israel and Gaza. But thank you, Sir Oliver, and thank you, Madam Loiseau. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Pedro Serrano.
Thank you so much. And again, many, many thanks also for all the very good questions. And many thanks to actually Minister Doherty, who I think has answered already at lightning speed, I have to say, but with impressive precision and surgical precision, I think, most of the questions. And I would tend to agree with almost all his answers. So I'll try. I don't have his, unfortunately, and you will excuse me, his knowledge of all of the personalities in this room. So I will be a bit more abstract when I refer to who has asked what, but I'll do my best to answer some of the questions. I think he laid out very well the list of those questions. And starting by the fact that collaboration is what really has to preside the relationship. It has to be a relationship built on trust, goodwill and collaboration, and we have found this trust, goodwill and collaboration after moments where it did not exist, and we all know it did not exist before. And I think to one of the comments that was made earlier on the horizon issue and any linkages, the cooperation and collaboration was not there. There were unilateral actions that were being envisaged. There were situations that were putting the European Union in a rather difficult situation. But when there has been a willingness from the UK side also and from the EU to cooperate, this has worked, and this is what has brought actually the Windsor Framework in a very pragmatic manner, looking at the real problems that existed and solving and finding solutions for those problems. So I think as long as we all maintain this line, I think Minister Doherty was also very good in saying that he believes, and I think it's very, very good for all of us to hear, that after any elections, and regardless of the outcome of those elections, this is going to remain the main line. I think that's a very important step, and I do I tend to see often political realities that go beyond the mere instant. There's a trend, and I think the trend in the relationship is definitely that one. I can also assure you, of course, there are many representatives of the European Parliament here, and it's for them to say these things probably. But regardless of what happens also after European elections, with changes also maybe in the leadership of the European Union, I think on the EU side, you also will have that clear vision that we have to continue working together and engaging together and addressing the huge challenges that we're facing in Europe. And we have the same interest, we share the same values, and we have to continue working together. So I think the rebuilding of this trust is what is marking this year, and our cooperation is the outcome of that rebuilt trust and identification of common interests. On our structures, are we content, you were saying, Lord Ricketts? It would be, no one can say he is or she is content. So I'm sure anything can be improved, but I would agree with Minister Doherty that the structures are working well. And yes, I heard that there were some complaints regarding the information that is not being transmitted. I'm sure that we will all be looking into that to if there are things that have to be amended and improved. Very happy to improve what needs to be improved, at least on our side, certainly. But the structures are good. We are, I think, and cover the relationship in very wide formats. And I think we have to look at how we can use them in a more imaginative manner, if that is necessary, to ensure that we are, and more with the necessary flexibility to ensure that we're responding in due time to the challenges that the relationship may be facing and to steps that we may need to be taking together. But we have a very solid basis with these structures to continue advising. On migration, certainly we know the importance of this subject is not only a UK relevant for the UK, it's very relevant for the European Union. We have taken very important steps in the European Union. The Parliament will be engaged in ratifying or advising on or deciding on some of those steps shortly with the Migration Pact that has been, it's already, oh, okay.
No, I said that, deciding, not ratifying.
Deciding, sorry.
Co-legislator.
No, yeah, deciding, sorry. I used a wrong term, and I agree with my chair, Madame Loiseau. Deciding on some of these very important issues. And so that's, and actually, the fact that the European Union as such reaches an understanding on the better management of migration is going to have, regardless of how we cooperate, it's going to have a direct impact as well, I think, on migration into the EU, irregular migration, as there will be more controlled flows throughout Europe. And I think that's a good thing for all of us and for the security of all our borders. But there's already strong cooperation on these subjects. There's cooperation in the Calais format. There's cooperation through Europol. We're working on an agreement with Frontex as well. We are actually working with similar partner countries of origin or transit. So there's a lot of work that's going on already in this field. And I think a very important element of that cooperation, I think it was mentioned before, is also the adherence to ECHR and international commitments, which is the basis both for the European Union and for the UK to be able to cooperate with full trust and confidence on these areas. On sanctions were also referred to. I think sanctions has been an area of very strong cooperation between the European Union and the United Kingdom. We started cooperating on sanctions before even we had to, we've been cooperating on sanctions when the UK was actually a member of the European Union. The UK was a very active member of the European Union in using the sanctions instrument. But ahead of what was going to happen in Ukraine, we were already preparing what could be the measures, and we'd been cooperating in rolling out those measures, in having the right intelligence and sharing intelligence on those measures, and we continue cooperating on these things. And of course, I think you mentioned the importance of preventing circumvention, and that is right now the main emphasis of the European Union, precisely to prevent the circumvention, and we are working together, I think, in very much with the UK and sharing intelligence also on where there are problems of circumvention. On energy security, I fully agree with what Minister Doherty says. The UK can provide additional resilience to the EU, and the UK can benefit enormously, obviously, from the resilience that the EU provides to it also in terms of energy security. There are discussions underway, as foreseen in the TCA, to address some of the issues particularly on trading arrangements, and these discussions are taking place. And I think that and of course the UK was associated to the North Sea Energy Cooperation. It has participated in the important decisions in the summit that took place in Ostende. So this is an area where cooperation has actually happened, and more things will take place, obviously. So that I think is a good area to continue developing, and it's part of the TCA as well, with obligations. On mobility, we believe that one very important thing to keep the trust and the cooperative relationship is to ensure that our societies continue to be as united as possible. And for that, youth mobility is particularly relevant, and we're looking into how we can improve that youth mobility with the UK at present. And this is a discussion that is ongoing, and I do hope that we will be making progress on this. On the reform of the TCA, here it's not the reform of the TCA, actually the reform of implementation, not the reform, the review, sorry. The review, or what did I say? Wrong word, to strike that. The review, no reform. I wanted to say there's no reform of the TCA. The review of the TCA. This is something that is foreseen for 2026, and I think we have time. And precisely my point was that the review is on the implementation of the TCA and not on the reform of the TCA. So it's a review of the implementation. I'm sure that we're all going to be having a lot of time ahead of us to examine this together closely. And I think with that I've covered most of the points that have been made. And I'm very grateful and having the honor to address you today, and I wish you very successful exchanges in the coming hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Just a few words on my side. I want to reassure my British colleagues, you are not the Philippines. No offense for Filipinos either. You are a very special third country because of your choice to be a third country, but you're still very special. And I don't imagine that we would sign anything similar or even nearing the TCA with any other country, not the Philippines and not any other that we know. What I heard from your statements was a very long list of expectations for stronger relations. There might be different priorities. Some will mention migration, or they will stress energy security or fisheries or defense or mobility. But it all goes in the same direction. Stronger relations between the EU and the UK. So it will keep you busy, Ambassador. We will probably not reform the TCA, but we will try to improve our relations, whatever it takes. Every time we find a solution, let's go in this direction, and let's not just indulge in nice words, but also make sure that we implement our joint commitments. Having said that, I hand the floor back to Sir Oliver.
Thank you very much indeed. And can I just say that we're now going to move to our next exchange of views and session, which is about mobility of people. Thank you very much. And I think Greg Hans, who's the Minister, is here. Greg Hans is Minister. Now, I wonder if the technology whizzes could confirm whether or not Richard Shostak is available, addressing us virtually. Good. Well, can I say that then that we're now moving on to our second exchange of views on mobility of people. The Bureau agreed to debate this subject following a productive discussion in the breakout group at our last meeting in Brussels, and I'm delighted that we have with us this afternoon two guest speakers to share their thoughts before opening up the debate to the floor. And so we warmly welcome, although in a somewhat cold room here, Richard Shostak, who's of course the Director for Western European Partners Secretariat General of the European Commission, and he'll be addressing us virtually. And then we're very lucky that the Right Honourable Greg Hands, the Minister for Trade Policy with the UK government, who was to have been addressing us virtually as well, has actually been able to come here in person, which we're very grateful for. So thank you both very much. And Richard Shostak, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great, great. Well, let me kick off the discussion then. I hope so. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be able to address the PPA. The starting point, I think, for the Commission on the question of youth mobility between the EU and the UK starts from the fact that, unfortunately, mobility for everybody, but in particular for youth, is much harder at the moment than it was, of course, a few years ago before the UK left the EU. There are more formalities to be accomplished, there are more costs, and there's less of an opportunity. And this is reflected in a very stark reduction in the numbers of citizens moving and staying on either side of the channel. In the year ending June 2023, there was the net migration of EU citizens towards the UK was negative, minus 86,000 people. So 86,000 people more left the UK, EU citizens, than arrived. Similarly, there was a 50% drop first-year EU students in the UK between 2020, between the year 2020, 2021, and the year 2021, 2022. And I think on the EU side, there's pretty much a consensus view that this is a terrible shame. The UK has reached out to a few member states, 5 or 6 member states, proposing a youth mobility scheme. This is, of course, welcome recognition that the EU and the UK together can do much more to foster youth mobility. And recognition that these bridges, which from the perspective of mobility and youth mobility, which need to be built back. But the sense that we have from our contacts with member states, and I think it's reflected in the draft recommendation from the PPA, is that compared to what we should be aiming at, the schemes which have been proposed by the UK are somewhat underwhelming. And three points on this. The first one is that I think that on the EU side, we really think there should be a bigger discussion in between the EU and the UK about the ways in which we could rebuild bridges in terms of youth mobility, in terms of the ability for people under the age of 30 to move to the other side of the channel, to work, to stay, and to get on with their lives. And that as a result, we shouldn't be guided by a logic which deals in particular with issues related to gaps in the labour market. Second of all, and this is of course very much in the DNA of the Commission, but also I think of the European Parliament, that we believe that there should be a pan-European approach to this. We instinctively dislike when we see that a scheme is offered to 5 or 6 member states, but not to others. We think that there's more to be achieved on both sides with an approach which covers the whole of the European Union. And secondly, we query how much added value there is in these youth mobility schemes compared to other existing visa schemes which exist and which the UK has set up unilaterally. So when we on the EU side speak to EU citizens, and for example, when our delegation in London organises a conference with EU citizens who are under 30 and UK citizens under 30, what do we hear that they want? We hear a lot about study for longer or shorter periods. EU citizens want to study in the UK. We hear a lot about the possibility, hope that there are possibilities to do work placements in the UK as part of studies. And we hear concerns about travel and moving, having to be cheaper, having to be less restrictive. And so the perspective is on the EU side that there should be a real and an ambitious dialogue in between the EU and UK on this issue. And as I say, just to raise the level of ambition. And in that sense, a lot of what we see in this draft recommendation, which we hope will be endorsed by the PPA today, they're ideas that we would very much support. Thank you very much, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you very much. And now, if we can perhaps give the floor to Greg Hands.
Well, thank you, Oliver, and thank you, Nathalie Loiseau, for inviting me today to make a contribution. It's a pleasure to address a forum that is doing so much to help shape the future UK-EU relationship. Now, I speak to you as somebody who's been it's actually my first time before the PPA, but I've been a UK government minister most of the last 12 years. I've actually inhabited this seat as the Minister for Trade Policy, in fact, a record 4 times. Now, you'll note that I'm not the Minister for Immigration or the Home Office, so I will speak particularly to the trade aspects of the movement of people, particularly what's called in the world of trade Mode 4 movement, which is an area which sits under my department. But I did used to sit on the European Union Trade FAC, so I've sort of seen this situation from both the inside and from the outside. So this month, of course, we mark the 3rd anniversary of the signature of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which of course precipitated the UK's final departure from the EU. In those 36 months, the UK has struck out as an independent trading nation, signing trade deals and forging strategic partnerships around the world. We have, of course, fully embraced those opportunities, but we have never stopped striving to keep strong our relationship with our closest friends and neighbours in Europe. As someone personally with very strong close links to Europe, I know that our ties extend far beyond geographical proximity. They're based on friendship, rooted in history, and built on a shared commitment to free trade and indeed to freedom itself. So while the UK left the EU, we are very much not cutting ourselves off from Europe, far from it. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement has formed a strong basis for our ongoing relationship, and we have continued to together build upon it. In the last year alone, as has already been referred to at the end of the previous session, we've of course agreed the Windsor Framework and finalised our association to the Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Funding Programme. And I should, of course, not overlook the advances that have been made through the TCA-established trade specialised committees. The UK very much looks forward to further enhancing our relationship and maximising the potential of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement for our mutual benefit. However, conversation and reflection are key to any flourishing relationship, and that is why the UK very much welcomes the unique opportunities provided by this forum to engage with the European Parliament and also with the Commission. We are delighted to have the opportunity to discuss some of the most important aspects of that partnership. Our subject today, mobility, is of course one of those issues. It stands as a key pillar of our relationship with our European neighbours. And if I might just say a word personally, I personally profited from workplace mobility back in the year 1985 when I was age 19 and took part in a work exchange scheme between the United Kingdom and the Federal Republic of Germany, as it then was, West Germany, called Live and Work in Germany through the Deutsch-Britische Jugendaustausch, which I think may not exist anymore. I think it probably got submerged into a wider structure at the time. But I worked in West Berlin for 6 months and quite a few periods thereafter as well. So my department, the recently formed Department for Business and Trade, works to encourage and facilitate all forms of trade between the UK and the European Union and to maximise the opportunities of the TCA. We work closely with the Home Office and other government departments to develop the right business mobility policies for the UK. So I want to use my time this afternoon to outline our broad approach. Already the extent to which our citizens travel between our countries is illustrative of our relationship strength and the close links between our peoples. We understand the importance of business and professional mobility for our services and goods exporters as well as for foreign investment, which is the area that my department is very keenly focused on. However, we know from our conversations with businesses that there are still challenges here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges as we see them. And that is why we are very much open to constructive discussions with the Commission, with the European Parliament, with Member States, and the business community about practical suggestions for possible improvements to our respective guidance systems or to policy. And on that note, we very much welcome the productive discussions on mobility during the October meeting of the TCA Specialist Committee on Services Trade, and we look forward to continuing that conversation at the Trade Partnership Committee and Partnership Council. On a bilateral level, the UK has taken part in some productive discussions with partners across the EU on mobility issues, including with France, for example, as part of our new mobility dialogue, and we look forward to continuing those constructive exchanges. So let me now outline the steps we're taking in the UK. First, I'll turn to our work to support the movement of business visitors and service suppliers to and from the EU. As you will be aware, the TCA's Mode 4 provisions give businesses certainty. They also remove some barriers to movement, including the need for work permits for some short-term trips. The provisions also set minimum standards for publishing information about visa application processes, and these provisions we think are working well. However, as I mentioned earlier, the UK has been listening closely to the business community so we can better respond to their needs. A few weeks ago, the UK's Chancellor announced in his annual autumn statement a series of 110 measures designed to support businesses to grow. Among them were reforms to short-term business visitor routes coming into the UK to work. These reforms, which we have developed alongside our colleagues in the Home Office, we are making unilateral, and they include and encompass EU businesses as well. And I'm very pleased to say they will be introduced from January. Their aim is simple: to broaden and clarify the activities that business visitors can carry out while in the UK. These changes will also provide wider coverage for the legal services sector and simplify arrangements for those carrying out paid engagements. As we would all acknowledge, mutual recognition of qualifications, or what's called MRPQ in the world of trade, is an essential facilitator to the mobility of professionals in some of our most important sectors. The transfer of expertise across borders is crucial for sectors in professional and business services, as well as for academic research. I want to underline the UK is fully committed to ensuring that the TCA really does add value on the recognition of professional qualifications between the two markets. In the TCA, the UK and EU agreed a framework for regulators to develop profession-specific solutions for mutual recognition. The UK firmly supports the use of this framework to provide solutions for regulated professions. And that is why our government is fully behind our regulators as they work with their European counterparts on developing joint recommendations for profession-specific recognition arrangements. On a separate note, I should also add that we're also fully behind our cultural industries. I recognise that creative industries face a particular set of challenges regarding visas and work permits. We therefore welcome the helpful discussions and facilitations made thus far, which are very much to our mutual benefit. And finally, on the subject of cultural exchange, I want to just touch on youth mobility schemes. I mentioned, as somebody who spent a significant part of my youth working in Germany, taking advantage of these youth mobility schemes. This is way back in the 80s when you still did need to have a work permit and get your passport stamped with residence permits, all this kind of thing. It dates back that far. And I also studied in then Czechoslovakia. I can testify how this experience has shaped me as a person, giving new insights, a grasp of the languages and friendships that have lasted a lifetime. And I'm sure that some of you in this room have benefited from similar experiences. The UK government also very much recognises the cultural value of youth mobility and the importance of opening new cultural exchange opportunities for the young. And as a result, we are exploring further bilateral opportunities for reciprocal youth mobility schemes with our international partners, and naturally that includes our European neighbours as well. So I know, Oliver, Natalie, that there are many more areas for discussion today that I haven't covered in these remarks. However, I very much look forward to our discussions this afternoon and continuing what I'm sure will be a full and productive conversation. So thank you very much indeed for your time and for your attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And just before we open the debate, I should just say that we have until about 4:20 for this item. That should give us enough time to also deal with our draft recommendation. So can I hand over to Natalie in case she wants to make any comment?
Merci, Oliver, et merci.
Thank you, Oliver, and thanks to our two guest speakers for taking the floor. I'd like to say that the mobility of people is really at the heart of all of the issues we've been thinking about since Brexit, because this movement has been affected by the kind of Brexit that was chosen. I've heard a lot said by the Minister about the business side of things and the movement of people for work-related purposes. I think this is important, but I can't really think that the mobility of young people should be seen only through the perspective of a workforce. It's far more than that. We're going to lose a lot more than that when young Europeans don't come to the United Kingdom because the university costs are too high. It's far more than that that we're losing when it's difficult, nay, impossible to organize school trips. I'm not entirely sure as a European that I want to be considered as a provider of young, cheap employment for the British market. And I think that the risk that we're running is that our young people are starting to look askance. They're not going to know more about one another. They're going to be more prejudiced rather than having knowledge and experience of the other. And I sincerely think that our work at this Parliamentary Partnership Assembly is to look at everything that's possible within the existing framework to encourage all improvements that are possible given the choices that we have made. And we mustn't allow for the divergence of our youth. so that they don't know more about one another. Thank you.
And after that intervention, which I think I agree with very strongly, can we now give the floor, I can now give the floor to members for interventions for 2 minutes each to begin with. I should also mention that in this item we do have contributions from the Welsh Assembly, the Senedd, and also from the Scottish Parliament. So perhaps we could start, though, with our first speaker from the European Parliament, Danuta Hübner.
Thank you very much. And I would like to start by thanking Minister for, we've never heard this kind of speech where you are really showing openness to also facilitate the mobility in the context of the entire economy and in the context of all those instruments which we have already under TCA largely, I think, but some of them are required further talks, but through facilitating mobility, just having the positive changes with regard to the trade between EU and UK is something which I think TCA could only benefit. So we are very much probably would be supportive of those ideas, but we are also concerned with a different dimension of mobility, of which the Commission was also mentioning. We also remember that for 2 years actually we lived in a framework that did not allow us to cope with many issues, and the Windsor framework actually opened the doors and allowed us also to focus on full exploitation of everything that we have in TCA, using all the instruments, all the bodies which we have, all the specialized committees which we negotiated and which are today in TCA. They can, if used properly, they can really expand our relations greatly. And what is now happening, I think I see it as a very good prognostic for the future. We are moving in the right direction. Nevertheless, we should also talk about the issues where we have still problems, and certainly not only mobility, but also what Ambassador mostly mentioned, which is the citizens' rights, is also the issue where we have to do more together. And I would like to express also the appreciation for the Independent Monitoring Authority, which is in touch with us, with the Parliament, and which is doing extremely good job also to facilitate the move towards solving all the problems that we have still with citizens' rights. And I don't want to talk about that because we are now focused on the mobility. And I think that this is a relatively new movements that we are seeing now on the UK side, and this is quite different from what we understand by mobility, because we think that really mobility should be about the building bridges, and especially among young people, so that we can also future-proof the whole policy at the same time. And the focusing mostly on the labor market or exclusively at the labor market is something that we are not really sharing or supporting. This is, of course, extremely important, but thinking of how to improve the supply side, on the supply side, the labor market in UK through this policy of mobility, we don't see it adequate for us. This is a different challenge, and what we see actually with regard to the students, we see on the one hand the narrative about facilitating the visas, but at the same time we see also very concrete steps increasing the costs for the students to live and to study in UK. So on this we would like to talk how we can truly facilitate the students' life of students coming from the European Union to the UK. And the last issue, which I would also like to support as parliamentarian, we see this approach through individual bilateral efforts to have agreements with individual member states. We see it also as kind of discriminatory move. We cannot just have this type of policies within the European Union. The member states which are beyond the 6 to which the UK Home Office reached out, they don't understand what's going on. So we would like to support, I would like to support also the approach of the Commission that we should aim at the European approach to this challenge. But it is, I hope that we both sides understand how important are really people in this whole exercise, and that's why we should just do it properly, and we should find agreement to EU-wide agreement to really support the exchanges between the UK and Europe, and this is really important for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Baroness Bull.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir Oliver. And can I say, she isn't here, but I really agree with everything Madame Loiseau said about the role and the purpose of youth mobility. I'm going to focus on the issue of touring artists, which I regret wasn't greatly covered by either of the speakers. The minutes of the July Partnership Council note that the situation of UK touring artists is the result of the UK leaving the EU. And of course, this is true, sadly, but it's a very narrow view that it ignores the social, the cultural, and the economic value of artistic collaboration. It also ignores the fact that the current situation is damaging artists from the EU as well as the UK now, and the evidence for that is clear. The additional complexity and cost of this multiple bilateral agreements that UK artists have to face is seriously impacting on their careers, and it's particularly hitting young and emerging talent, and I know we're all very concerned about youth opportunities. But we know too that EU artists, promoters and audiences are missing out. We know that European venues and festivals are struggling to book UK acts. Typically they've brought bigger box office, bigger knock-on effects for local economies. This is harder. We know that EU artists are struggling to access the UK live music market. That's the second most lucrative live music market in Europe. And yet this year, we had a reduction in 40% of EU artists booked to play UK summer music festivals. This means we are all losing out, and it isn't what we intended. So I really hope the Partnership Council will heed our recommendation to develop a comprehensive approach that would allow artists and their staff to tour freely. I would urge consideration of a visa waiver agreement, a reciprocal offer that would harmonise regulations across member states and across the UK so that visa-free short-term visits on agreed terms could take place. This has been recommended by the UK and EU domestic advisory groups. They've called for exactly that. And there's clear precedent in the visa waiver agreements the EU already holds with multiple third countries, although apparently not with the Philippines, if the website I'm checking is right. Mobility is vital for artists and particularly emerging talent. It's how they build their craft, their networks and their audience base. We've repeatedly heard that both sides wanted, but the other side rejected a deal on touring. So we are where neither side wanted to be. If the Windsor framework is an indication that we can go forwards on issues where there's mutual desire to do better, then surely mobility of artists is one such issue.
Thank you very much for that plea on behalf of the touring artists and musicians. And the next speaker is Mr. Pedro Silva Pereira.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, in light of the presentations we've heard, I very much welcome the recommendations that we have before us and that we are going to discuss and hopefully adopt, because they will allow us to address very concrete issues and to deliver important political messages to solve existing problems. Well, touring artists, it was just mentioned, but on issues like school visits, the specific call to abandon this idea of individual visas for third country nationals. This will eliminate an obstacle that we now face without generating any sort of particular risk. But also on the issue of the youth mobility schemes, the political message to avoid discrimination. And of course, bilateral arrangements create difference, therefore discrimination, and a pan-European approach would be, of course, much better. And by the way, an approach that really deals with the difficulties that young people are talking about. And they talk about what? They talk about tuition fees to come to study to the UK. They talk about the Erasmus program, and I very much hope that after the solution we had for the Horizon program, we can do a similar progress regarding the Erasmus Plus, and I hope we don't have to wait for a Labour government for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Stephen Hammond.
Slightly surprised because I said I wasn't going to speak today, but still. Two things, I think. One is really important that we need to look at some of the youth mobility transferable schemes that have been available and should be reactivated at all levels, particularly in research, science and clinical research, which are currently not available. And I think the UK government and the European nations should look at what are the costs of visa fees and also health costs, enabling that to happen. That is an area which has been, I think, of real detriment to both sides. And it's a relatively simple thing to cure. I think that would be helpful in terms of the mobility of people. The other thing we should look at, I think, particularly, which we're missing out dramatically at the moment, is the ability of scholarships and foundations across the European Union and the UK for people to come and study both in the UK and in Europe. Everybody in the UK, everybody concentrates on the fact that there has been a 50% drop in EU students coming here. What is also forgotten is the number of British students who used to go to particularly both Dutch and German universities, which has dropped dramatically as well. And Sir Oliver, I think that with a little bit of common sense for looking for the future, some international scholarship schemes could be developed. As I said, I hadn't thought I was going to speak, so I hope that's a contribution.
There may have been some administrative problem, who knows. But anyway, thank you for speaking. And our next speaker is Gert Bourgeois.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Well, I want to focus on the illegal migration. I was informed that the UK installed now a developing countries trading scheme instead of the generalized scheme of preferences that we had in the EU. And surprisingly, is that the UK government did not include a clear link between its GPS, generalized scheme of preferences, and readmission. So this is exactly what the Commission and the Council in Europe is proposing, which is not yet approved by the European Parliament. My party is very much in favor, but I think this is the most effective way to deal with illegal migration. All those developing countries have zero tariffs, zero quota, and it should be fair that they are open for readmission of illegal migrants to which asylum is refused.
And now we bring in Hugh Iranka-Davies, who is a member of the Welsh Senedd.
Thank you, Sir Oliver, and thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting for a few minutes on what we think is a pioneering approach within Wales on the TAIF programme. TAIF is Welsh for journey, and it goes beyond purely employment mobility to a wider context, as has been discussed by Madame Loiseau and others earlier. We know that the desire of young people and researchers and civil society organisations in the UK and EU to continue to engage is clear, and our respective work in our own legislature in Wales has shown it. We know from evidence from people that we've taken evidence from that there continues to be regret at the UK's decision not to join the Erasmus Plus programme. So in Wales, the First Minister has made clear that the Welsh Government's long-term ambition is for Wales to join Erasmus once again. But in the interim, The Welsh Government has established its own international learning exchange programme called TIFE. It's worth £65 million between 2022 and 2026. Some of you will have heard of it. For those who haven't, I'll tell you a few details. Like Erasmus+, it's open to schools, youth, adult education, further education, vocational education and training, and higher education, and every education type, formal, informal, and non-formal. It is, importantly, a reciprocal programme, providing funding for both the outward mobility of Welsh organisations and individuals, and also funding inward mobility to Wales from the rest of the world. The target is to support 15,000 people to undertake an outward mobility between 2022 to 2026 and 10,000 people undertaking inward mobility to Wales. Since it was launched in 2022, TIFE has awarded funding in support of 142 projects to more than 150 organisations from every local authority in Wales, supporting over 11,000 people to learn, study and volunteer all over the world, with the funding supporting exchanges between Wales and more than 90 countries and territories. There were 5,000 outward mobilities and 1,000 inward mobilities to Wales in 2022-23 alone. So as we look to the future, Sir Oliver, Welsh universities will be submitting views to the European Commission consultation on Erasmus+. We'll be looking for further synergies and opportunities for collaboration between TIFE and Erasmus, and in the longer term, ensuring that the door remains open for future UK Erasmus participation. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugh. We now have Mr. Beck from the ID group.
Yeah. Thank you so much for accommodating me. I've got a question about, I mean, as the European Union is about to replace the term, trying to abolish illegal migration by calling it irregular migration. I appreciate we are talking about mobility here, but doesn't seem to exclude the possibility of talking about irregular mobility a bit as well. Now, there's been a very important Supreme Court judgment here in this country not too long ago, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, concerning the administration of asylum claims in Rwanda. I know the UK was one of the first countries after Denmark to broach this subject. I know there's talk of legislating despite the judgment. I also appreciate the minister isn't a lawyer, but maybe he's able to say a word or two about the contents of their judgment. Why did the court reject that scheme? And then perhaps also about the government's approach to that judgment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I doubt if the Minister would feel able to give an opinion on that, but of course there is a lot of consideration being given to the Supreme Court judgment, and we'll have to see what the outcome of that is. The next speaker is Alan Smith.
Thanks, Oliver. A few brief points. Firstly, on youth mobility, and I'd question the Minister very openly. If the UK is admitting that there is merit in bilateral arrangements with individual member states, why not accept the EU's logic of having those discussions with the EU as a whole? Because I would pledge my support in that. I think that would be a win-win for everybody. So why is the UK doing this bilateral approach when it actually doesn't need to, and it would be easier, surely, administratively, to deal with the UK on those terms? On Erasmus+, my party's position is very clear. The Scottish Government is running a pilot programme to try and replace it. I have to say bluntly, the Turing scheme is a poor shadow of what's been lost. And we would like to see the whole of the UK opt back into Erasmus+. Again, we think if we can do that with Horizon, we can do that with students and people being trained as well. On touring artists, there's as we eloquently heard, there's a real economic mutual self-interest in exempting touring artists from the visa restrictions, also the customs exemptions for equipment as well. I think there's a lot of lumps and bumps could be ironed out by approaching that. But I have to say on mobility issues, full stop, I can't stop an overwhelming sense of sadness at what's been lost. I took advantage of those rights myself, lots of people in this room did. And I'll support any moves to bring us back into these frameworks, piecemeal or en bloc. But the obvious solution surely is to just go back into freedom of movement for all our citizens.
Well, thank you for that ambitious remark. The next speaker is Chris McManus.
Thank you, Chair. And I know the broader discussion has been around youth mobility and student programmes, but my query or comment is on a much more specific sector that's much more geographically finessed, and that's around the outstanding issue that's impacting, or the potential to impact, tourism on the all-island Irish economy, and that's around the Nationality and Borders Bill. The tourism economy in the north is heavily reliant on visitors travelling from the south. I think the figures are 70% of tourists that go to the north of Ireland actually arrive via Dublin, and it threatens the 250 million plus pounds spent in the local economy if there is the visa waiver that could impact on nearly 500,000 tourists annually. And I think since its inception, Tourism Ireland has spent over £1 billion marketing overseas, and that's come from the Irish Government and the six-county executive, and that has been promoting unrestricted access across the island. So and I just want to ask, is there an awareness or an understanding on the Partnership Council about this issue in regards to it? And also that, I just want to highlight, it goes against commitments around the Good Friday Agreement that there should be and must be a harmonisation of rights north and south.
Thank you, Chris. Next speaker is Rupa Huck.
Hi, everyone. Just some observations that occurred to me while listening to this session. Three things, really, as a constituency MP that have appeared in my inbox. First of all, anyone who does import-export, it's very punitive now we've left the common VAT area. I don't know what can be done to sort that out, but there's several sets of duties of goods that come between countries. A constituent of mine was in the FT and interviewed him how it's crippling him, especially for returns, because consumer law obliges that you have to honour those, but it's not worth it after all these different sets of duties and taxes. Secondly, I'd echo what Deborah Bull said about touring musicians. I'm on the DCMS Select Committee. We've heard a story of, I think it's from the Really Useful Theatre Group, a touring production of Les Mis went into the whole of Europe from China because it was cheaper to do than an English one, which is such a lot nearer. It just seems nuts. So I don't know if that can be sorted. There's also a group, Trigger Cut, a German punk band, that had letters of invitation and a tour booked. They were turned away at customs because they were deemed not professional enough musicians. Since when has that been part of a customs officer's duties, to tell the degree of professionalism of these musicians? And then thirdly, je suis 100% d'accord avec ce que Madame Loiseau a dit.
I fully agree with what Ms. Loiseau said. I spent a year at university in Strasbourg, and I think that really helped me when it came to opening up.
I am finding is for school trips, these are kids coming in a coach from wherever. They're not used to having passports and visas. The ID card system worked very well. Why can we not? They're not immigrants. I think there's a problem that this Conservative government has with seeing everyone as immigrants and baddies. I think we could make an exemption for them. Also, in my constituency, Ealing Central and Acton, I know Greg is a near neighbour of mine in the next door borough, we have a lot of language schools. Those used to be very thriving over the summer. Kids would come over, very trendyly dressed people put us to shame, and they would learn English. They would do a bit of work in maybe pubs and bars on the side. those language schools are disappearing at a rate of knots. They're often in seaside towns. If he asks his colleagues from the coast, a lot of them have completely shut their doors because the fact of having a visa and a passport is too overbearing for kids who just come for the summer months. Minister, you described yourself, Greg, how you were happy to do this in the last century, as was I in Germany. That is being blocked off. I think we could look at ways, I don't know who it is, probably our Home Office, and I know you said you're not a Home Office Minister. Anyway, just some thoughts for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Rupert. And the next speaker from the EPP group is Mr. Laurent Vincer.
Thank you, Chair, and dear colleagues. I also believe that it would be a grave mistake to underestimate the importance of youth mobility schemes, student exchanges, and school trips compared to immediate economic and geopolitical cooperation needs. These programs ensure soft diplomacy, they promote goodwill and better understanding. And I see that there are important bilateral developments between the UK and some member states for short-term visa, free travel and the youth mobility. But I echo the opinion of many that in the EU we would need to have a common approach. And it would be most appropriate if the negotiation with the UK part would be led by the EU on behalf of the member states to avoid eventually different treatment among the EU member states and our citizens. Now, two short questions. In the European Parliament, we have followed with great interest the legal challenge brought by the Independent Monitoring Authority before the UK High Court, and we were relieved to see that the court had found that parts of the EU settlement scheme were unlawful. Now, we would like to know how is the implementation of the High Court judgment. Apparently, the Home Office plans are not yet there. And the second question, at the May meeting of the Joint Committee, the EU raised deep concerns about the EU citizens who received refusal decisions between the 27th of June 21 and 19th of April 22, but whose digital status did not accurately reflect this until January this year, so due to the operation of the EU settlement scheme. So do you know any developments on this matter? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker from the Scottish Parliament is Claire Adamson, MSP.
Thank you very much, Sir Oliver, and I welcome the opportunity to participate this afternoon as a member of the Scottish Parliament and convener of the Constitution Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee. In advance of today's meeting, our committee held a roundtable with stakeholders in the music industry and the challenges of touring within EU. The barriers have been well rehearsed this afternoon, but in the area of visa and work permits, we heard in a recent inquiry visit to Ireland that Scottish artists are losing out to bookings which are going to EU artists just because of logistics. The increased costs have been spoken about, and we know that there are many successfully touring musical acts who are no longer going to be going to Europe because they just can't break even and make it work for them anymore. And the logistics around visa, work permits, carnage and cabotage have all fed into that. The upshot of all of this is that it's making it, and I quote, harder to sustain a thriving music industry in Scotland. And we have heard how it is so much harder for emerging artists to break into Europe. And while I know there is a very understandable focus on youth exchange, our creative industries wanted you to know that not all emerging artists can be classified as being in a youth category. What Scottish artists tell us they want is a cultural touring agreement between the UK and the EU to overcome these issues with visas and customs and with touring arrangements. Baroness Bowles spoke so eloquently of the economic reasons why we should do all this, but our Royal Scottish National Orchestra spoke of touring not only being crucially important for the National Orchestra, but reputationally from Scotland. But this works both ways. We benefit so much from you visiting us, and we need to hear your songs and learn your language too. This has to be part of the future. After all, it has been with us Auld Lang Syne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Very good. And the last speaker from the European Parliament side is Mr. Colm Markey.
Thank you very much, Sir Oliver. I did note, just on a separate point, I did note last year when we were here, we were on the other side of the room. I hope the movement to this side with the open window isn't in any way a cooling of what has been a very positive 12 months in the relationship. I say that like in terms of the greater work in the specialised committees, the announcement you made earlier as regards Horizon, the energy and security, and indeed a positive, if you like, attitude from the government leadership, I think has been very positive in the relationship as a whole in the last 12 months. However, this whole situation as regards student mobility is one of, I suppose, grave concern of my own. I always think that the next generation of young people coming forward, having open mind and reaching out to someone from elsewhere is a very positive thing in terms of building relationships. I think the current proposed student mobility scheme is very, as was mentioned earlier, is very disjointed in terms of its approach with different countries. The fact that we've only, if you like, a 51% reduction in terms of EU students at UK colleges is perhaps reflective of that. Another figure I heard, and people made mention of school pupils, an 83% reduction in school pupils attending a UK school. So clearly there is an issue. I myself, as someone who a long time ago, in 1992, I spent some time in Holland, and the experience was the first meaningful experience I had at European level in terms of engagement with another European country, and was very positive. So I think the benefits are enormous. They're not just business and social. It's the cooperation, the linkages between universities, the experiences people get. But in a lot of ways, it's in the areas of humanities and, if you like, social policies are just as important as, if you like, business and the labour market. I attended the launch of the TATE programme in Brussels there last year, and it's very positive to see both the Welsh and the Scottish Parliaments being so positive towards this. I think the mention by Alex Smith and others in relation to the Erasmus programme, really the only way to do this, in my opinion, is Erasmus+. It's a coordinated approach. It's also a very strong brand across both the UK and Europe, and it's something that I really think we should build on into the future, and perhaps the next step of our positive relationship could be to cement an Erasmus Plus programme that builds a bridge, a stronger bridge and a stronger relationship between our EU and UK in the year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker from the floor is Willie Back.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Sorry, I should say.
Thank you. If there's one thing that people find that has put the clock back since the UK left the EU, it's surely got to be this issue around mobility as far as the young and as far as touring artists are concerned. Standing back, it is somewhat shocking, isn't it, that we have permitted a system to decline that allowed people from different countries and different traditions to meet and gain from obvious human and social advantages. We must be a little bit crazy that we've allowed this to become so much more difficult. Of course, I support the recommendations that are going to be put to us shortly, but do those recommendations really meet the need and the urgency to do something about this? We need a solution to it really quickly now, because it's absurd that we've thrown away an old system and have got very little in its place.
Well, thank you very much. Before just calling our principal speakers to respond, I just wanted to say that I hope we can find a positive way forward on this, and that it doesn't have to wait until 2026 for the review. I hope that we could see a way of better cooperation between the Turing programme and the Erasmus programme, Some of the youth mobility ideas that we discussed between the UK and the Commission when the agreement was made in the first place, that we perhaps could make more progress, because in a way the negotiations at that stage just found it impossible to do any sort of bespoke arrangement for Britain. But, you know, if we could have youth mobility agreements covering things like study, but also training, setting up businesses, working, I think it would be very good for our young people. And I do feel sorry for the touring artists and the poor old punk band being stopped at the customs. It's not what you'd want, is it, really? Although personally I wasn't a great fan of punk. But anyway,
Really?
I won't ask Richard Shostak to comment on punk, but if he was able to respond to the debate, we'd be very grateful. So I'd now invite Richard Shostak to take the floor.
Thank you very much. I'd be happy to, of course. So 3 points from my side. First of all, on the school trips. So the difficulty for organize school trips across the Channel, we think is twofold. Because indeed we have seen a stark reduction in movement in both directions. The first problem that we see relates to the requirement by the UK of passports rather than ID cards. We think that if the UK were to accept that ID cards would suffice for kids to be able to go on school trips to the UK, we think this would make things already much easier and much better. And we think without too many risks for the UK. The second aspect is that in any class there'll often be kids who are not from the UK or from the EU, in other words, from other countries around the world that happen to go to school in either the EU or the UK. There is a visa issue, and there, the way EU law works, at least, member states can agree to visa waivers for that specific category of person, i.e. kids from third countries traveling to the EU for the purpose of a school trip. So these are problems which are eminently solvable, we think, and of course would be solved to the benefit absolutely of both sides. Touring artists face far more obstacles, I'm afraid. Visas are one, and there I think that pretty much all member states have waived the visa requirement for touring artists. I think pretty much all. But what touring artists do is much more complicated, actually. If you break it down, there's the issue of the lorry moving from country to country in between member states, so a cabotage issue. There's the question of getting the equipment into the EU. There's the question on the tax on merchandise. And actually, when you look at what a touring artist does when he or she travels in the EU, actually you realize that they do things that were simple, evident when the UK was a member of the EU, but with Brexit and with the choices of the UK government, actually the TCA chooses to restrict the possibility for the provision of those services, for the travelling, for the import of the equipment, on the sale of merchandise. And it's this accumulation of obstacles that leads to the higher costs and puts things off. So for the touring artists, unfortunately, it goes kind of directly against the logic of the TCA as chosen by the UK government. That's why it's so difficult. That's why it's so difficult to fix. The third point is just I'd like to come back to the broader one, and the main point that I made in my opening remarks, and that Madame Loiseau made in her comments, and a number of the MEPs made in there, which is that we on the EU side, we of course have seen the figures on legal migration into the UK. We understand that it's very difficult to have a conversation with the EU about facilitating youth mobility in those kinds of circumstances. But we think, nevertheless, we ought to try to do it carefully, to do it tactfully, to see what can be done topic by topic. We think there should be a possibility to engage on these issues because the current situation compared to what it used to be is simply a terrible shame. And we ought to break it down into pieces, try to solve each one, and try to provide a better deal for young people on both sides of the channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now to complete the discussion, Greg Hands.
Well, thank you, Oliver, and thank you, everybody, for that fantastic debate. And I can only apologise for both the weather and perhaps the slightly colder circumstances in this committee room. But let me try and deal with a few points raised. Let me just deal first of all with what Nathalie Loiseau raised about, I think it's a misunderstanding. I think you described, but it may have been the translation, that the UK was looking for people to bring young, cheap employment. And that is not the case. What actually Mode 4 in trade agreements, including in the TCA, is all about is the movement of professionals. It's not cheap labour, it is actually the movement of professionals and the movement of those with qualifications, professional qualifications, like the sort of people like architects, lawyers and accountants. So when I spoke about the importance of Mode 4 movement, it definitely isn't about cheap labour, it's actually about very skilled people that would be mutually very, very beneficial to bring in UK expertise in areas like architecture, accountancy, legal system, and indeed vice versa. So that's what that is directed about. But I do agree with you, and I agree with Danuta Hübner, Laurent Vince, Con Markey about the importance of youth mobility. And the UK is very much engaged on this issue and very much wants to see better schemes of youth mobility between the UK and our European neighbours. That is what we are currently engaged on. In terms of touring artists raised by Baroness Bolt, Lord Bach, Rupert Huck, and others, the government, again, we do recognise there's a particular set of challenges regarding visas and work permits, but we have been engaging with the Trade Specialised Committee on Services, Investment and Digital Trade, in other words, where we engage regularly on the TCA, the workings of the TCA with the Commission, and indeed in both the 2021 and the 2023 meetings of the Partnership Council as well. So the UK is very much engaged in trying to ease that process. I think in terms of where youth mobility schemes, I think the UK is, as I said, we have been pushing to do this. Many member states have got youth mobility schemes with third countries, e.g. Canada. Like a lot of EU member states have got mobility schemes with Canada. We don't think there's any reason why, if you have one with Canada, that you cannot have one with the United Kingdom. So that is the sort of thing that we are looking at. It's not for me to say who has competence over things like youth mobility schemes, but the UK is very much engaged to improve that situation. I think Stephen Hammond's points about health costs and visa fees, I'm afraid I'm going to have to take that back and consult with ministerial colleagues in the health department and indeed the Home Office on that. I think Gerd Bourgeois' question about illegal migration from developing countries is a very strong point. I think making the point how important trade is for improving prosperity in developing countries. That is exactly why the UK has taken the EU's generalised scheme of preferences, the GSP scheme, and has made it more liberal still with our developing countries trading scheme. So we've actually lowered tariffs further than the EU has to developing countries. We've reduced tariffs. I don't think there's a single good for which the UK now has a higher tariff than the tariff we inherited from the European Union. So that is something through our developing countries trading scheme launched last year, where the UK is right at the forefront of increasing prosperity through trade as a way of averting illegal migration. Obviously, it's not the whole source of illegal migration, but I think it definitely helps where you can make your market more open to goods and increasingly services from the developing world. Gunnar Beck's question, who of course Gunnar used to work for the House of Commons, asked why did the court reject the Rwanda scheme? And Oliver, you won't be surprised to hear that you're right. I won't be tempted to go down that road to speculate on the motivation behind a court decision. But as the Home Secretary has laid out, the Rwanda scheme is not a be-all or end-all. You're also right that other European countries are considering or have considered that sort of scheme, and the government is considering its response. I think Rupert Huck's questions about import-export rates, VATs, excise and so on, I would urge that it's inevitably a consequence of leaving the customs union. You know, let's be frank. Leaving a customs union, which, by the way, has got some merits to it as well, because it enables you to pursue an independent trade policy. Like, for example, if we did not have an independent trade policy, if we hadn't left the customs union, we wouldn't have been able to lower those tariffs for developing country goods, for example. So that is one example of an advantage of being outside of the EU customs union. But in terms of your businesses, we do have international trade advisors. We've also got a fantastic diplomatic network, a commercial diplomatic network throughout the European Union who can engage on behalf of your small businesses. So please point them in the direction of the Department of Business and Trade. You mentioned German punk bands, and I don't want to continue the theme. Oliver, I happen to have a complete set of Einstürzen und Neubauten CDs, always willing to see a good German punk band arrive in this country. But in terms of like traveling touring artists, I refer back to what I said earlier about the engagement that the UK has been doing on that issue as well. Language schools, it's a mixed picture, to be frank. And you know, well before the UK left the EU, there was a constant stream of complaints from language schools in this country about visa regulations not being sufficiently liberal. And I remember when I was first elected in 2005, it was a constant complaint about the then Labour government about that. I don't think it's a new phenomenon. What I would say is that in our part of West London, we have some very, very strong bilingual schools that are doing incredibly well. Both Lycée Charles de Gaulle and Winston Churchill are doing really well. The number of bilingual schools, primary schools, French, Spanish in particular, are also doing really well. So I think that sector of bilingualism in the UK is also doing quite well at a school level. So if I might, Oliver, final points I'd say is we're engaging on touring artists. We're very much engaged on doing more on Mode 4 business travel, mutual recognition of professional qualifications, which I think is incredibly important for boosting prosperity, both in the UK and in the EU, and more on youth mobility as well. And I will pass on some of those comments to ministerial colleagues, definitely in reference to visas, in reference to healthcare and other areas that are outside of my specific responsibility. But I think you'll see the UK government is very supportive in areas here in terms of improving aspects of mobility between the UK and the European Union. Thank you.
Well, can I thank both our speakers for a very full presentation of the subject, but also explaining some of the challenges, which I think our recommendation recognises, but we're pushing for progress. So thank you very much indeed. I have heard back now from the Director General of the House of Commons about the heating situation, which hasn't been acceptable, and I do apologise, particularly to our guests, for it being so cold. I'm told that tomorrow it will be warm. So our next item is the adoption of the recommendation. It's been circulated. We will proceed straight to consideration of the recommendation as a whole, and it requires a majority within each delegation in order to be supported and adopted. So perhaps I could start with the European Parliament delegation and ask the members of that delegation to raise their hand if they are in favour of the recommendation. Could you raise your hands if you're in favour? Yeah.
Exercise keeps you warm.
Yes, and it's probably a bit of exercise. Anyone against? Right, so that's unanimous. Now on the UK delegation, can we also have a show of hands? All those in favour? Anyone against? No. So we've got, again, unanimous. So that is approved, and it has a majority in both delegations and is therefore agreed. So I think that's a clap. Thank you very much, Greg. Just a few remarks now. We're going to apparently have an official photograph. Is that in here?
Yes.
And we need people, all the delegates, to come forward so that you're up this end, including our observer team. So can somebody just explain what we're doing?
We're replicating this from last year.
Yes. So we want people to